claiming that America's economy is in decline is peddling fiction.
Welcome back to the world over. President Obama delivered his last State of the Union address and painted a rosy picture of America during his years in the presidency. Meanwhile, the GOP candidates are getting downright ugly. You weren't born here, you're missing votes, and Trump still leads. Here to put it all into perspective, I'm joined by the editor-in-chief of CNS News, Terry Jeffrey. Terry,
hey,
thanks
Raymond.
for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
What do you make of President Obama's contention that if you are saying this economy is bad, you're peddling fiction? And in fact, unemployment has been halved from 10% to 5% under Obama.
Well, I think what he's saying is demonstrably false. Let me give you two reasons. One is, if you look at the median household income of Americans who graduated from high school but didn't go to college, it's lower now than it was in the late 1990s. It's lower now for someone who graduated from high school but not college than it was for someone who attended 4 years of high school and didn't go to college back in the early 1970s. So that group of Americans, life is going down. Secondly, when you talk about employment, the labor force participation rate now is about as low as it was in the late 1970s. And part of that is because the baby boom generation is retiring. But another part of it we know from a study the Bureau of Labor Statistics just put out is that every age bracket you see a decline of participating in the labor force. Participating in the labor force means you either have a job or you're actively seeking it. It's the overarching statistic from which they get the unemployment figure. So fewer Americans are even trying to get jobs. Why? I would say part of that is because of dependency on the welfare state.
The president focused during his State of the Union on the terrorist threat in the Middle East, and he raised challenges like famine and ethnic conflict. Listen.
The world will look to us to help solve these problems. And our answer needs to be more than tough talk or calls to carpet bomb civilians. That may work as a TV soundbite, but it doesn't pass muster on the world stage.
Terry Jeffrey, your reaction given 10 sailors detained by Iran, humiliated in front of cameras. We've got 10 Gitmo prisoners released to Oman this week. We're lifting sanctions this weekend on Iran. Your thought on where we stand today?
One of the major actions President Obama took as president, and history will remember it for, is intervening in the Libyan civil war without congressional authorization to help rebels overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. What we got out of that is chaos, particularly in eastern Libya. The Islamic State is establishing itself there. We know what happened in Benghazi. We've seen the disintegration of Iraq. We're seeing the disintegration of Syria. We're seeing the persecution of Christians in that part of the world. And you also see, I think, which is troublesome to our most important allies in the Arab world, a tilt of the Obama administration towards Iran, which has a Shiite fundamentalist government headed by the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini. I think what the United States has to realize, and that President Obama doesn't, is that stability, even when we find it in monarchies and authoritarian regimes, which is where we see stability in the Sunni Arab world today, is good for our interests. And I think President Obama has actually made things worse in that part of the world, not better.
Yeah. I want to play this bite for you. The president took a swipe at Donald Trump, the GOP frontrunner, and following his address, during her Republican response, Governor Nikki Haley hit Trump as well. Listen.
Our public life withers when only the most extreme voices get all the attention. And most of all, democracy breaks down when the average person feels their voice doesn't matter, that the system is rigged in favor of the rich or the powerful or some special interest.
Today, we live in a time of threats like few others in recent memory. During anxious times, it can be tempting to follow the siren call of the angriest voices. We must resist that temptation.
Did Nikki Haley, Governor Nikki Haley, go too far here?
Well, I think what she's showing, she's really part of the one-party establishment, Raymond. I think one of the reasons Trump has got so much traction so far in this presidential campaign is because he's been going after the fact that there really is a one-party elite. Both the Republican and Democratic establishment have shared interests in staying in power. He threatens that interest, so I think you're going to see people who have that interest from both sides speak out against him.
She was a smart mouthpiece, though, to put out there. I mean, you have a very accomplished daughter of immigrants in a southern state a female Republican governor. She was hailed by many establishment figures, some folks on Capitol Hill, yet it didn't seem to work out quite the way they intended, because Donald Trump embraced it and said, yeah, I'm angry for the American people, and kind of spun it around.
Sure. No, I think people are very alienated from the political elite in this country right now, and that is at the heart of Trump's appeal.
And the Republicans here in Washington are afraid of him?
Without question.
Let's talk for a moment about his staying power. Why do you think it is? And you look at these polls. NBC, this is a brand new story, just came off as we began. Trump more than doubles national lead in NBC Wall Street Journal poll. In the average, you're talking about Trump nationally, 37.2%. His nearest competitor is Ted Cruz at 19%. Explain that.
Well, first of all, I don't put as much credit in the national polls as I would in the polls in Iowa and New Hampshire. Okay. I think Iowa is really a crucial decider. I believe we are looking at a truly historical, unique election. I think this is we're at a different moment in American life. I think people do think that there is great peril facing our country domestically, in terms of where we're going economically, where we're going culturally. But I think that if Trump wins Iowa, he will be very difficult for the Republicans to stop. If he doesn't win Iowa, it's going to change the nature of the election tremendously. Momentum means a great deal in presidential elections. Trump has had the momentum. He could lose it.
So you think if he doesn't win Iowa, it makes New Hampshire more difficult for him? He's so high, his numbers are through the roof in New Hampshire.
Right, I do think it does. I think for obviously
he's got like a 20-point advantage.
Right, right now I think that if you look at the Republican race in Iowa, it seems like it's basically between Trump and Cruz. They're very close. They're going back and forth in the polls. If Trump wins, he's going to have huge momentum going into New Hampshire. Yeah. And quite frankly, it's difficult at this point to see how someone would be able to stop him in the 8 days between the caucus and the New Hampshire primary. Yeah. If Cruz were to win in Iowa, I think Cruz gets out of there with a great deal of momentum, and the race changes.
I disagree with you just a little bit, because my sense is New Hampshire voters are very different. As you know, Terry, we're having worked campaign, Pat Buchanan's campaign, perhaps the godfather of Donald Trump. Let's face it, it's the Buchanan agenda that it seems to me Trump has embraced. Whether this is part of his marrow or not is a different question, but he's embraced those key issues of trade, immigration, national security, workers' rights, worrying about the workers and the working man. Senator Ted Cruz is obviously very aware of Donald Trump's ascendancy, and he's been avoiding direct attacks on Trump. That ceasefire seems to be over, since Trump has been raising the issue of whether Cruz is qualified to run for president, given that he was born in Canada. Here's Senator Ted Cruz.
More and more observers are saying this is coming down to a two-man race between Donald and me. And what we're seeing is conservatives are uniting behind our campaign, both in Iowa and New Hampshire and all across the country. And that seems to have really rattled Donald. He's begun now every speech for a week with extended attacks directed at me.
Is this working, Donald Trump attacking Ted Cruz and the constitutionality of his candidacy?
No, I don't think so. Well, first of all, the constitutionality is ridiculous. I mean, the Constitution says if you weren't someone who is alive at the time of the ratification of the Constitution, you have to be a natural-born citizen. One of the very first laws the first Congress passed in 1790 is said that a child born overseas to a U.S. citizen will be considered a natural-born citizen. Ted Cruz is a natural-born citizen. That doesn't cut it. I think what will be more interesting is because Cruz and Trump are positioned on the issues in a very similar way. I think it gets down to a question of credibility. And I believe one thing that happens in Iowa and New Hampshire is voters there pay a lot more attention to where these guys stand and what they believe is their credibility on the issues. And so I think you're going to see people very carefully weighing, what does Donald Trump really believe in? What does Ted Cruz really believe in? Which one of these two people really share my values, and can I trust if he were actually given power?
Let's face it, a big chunk of Donald Trump's support is because of the chutzpah, the showman aspect. He's been able to articulate this in a, not only a winsome way, a feisty way. It's unvarnished, and the working man looks at this and goes, finally, somebody speaking the truth. I'm going to show this clip, and then I want to talk about style and why style and the Trump style may or may not help him in those final days as people are closing and deciding who to vote for. Now, this is an arena event, another one Donald Trump held this week. Pensacola, Florida, 20,000 people. They turned 5,000 away. Listen.
We're going to win so much, you're going to beg me. You're going to say, Mr. President, we're so tired of winning, we can't take it anymore. Please don't win anymore. Mr. President, please have 1 or 2 losses. And I'll say, no, I won't do that. I won't do that because we are going to make America so great again.
He goes right back to the brand, right back to the log line. We're going to make America great again. Does this ultimately trump, no pun intended, Ted Cruz?
I don't think so. But look, I think that Trump is positioned correctly on the issues. I think his way of speaking and his manner is entertaining. It's especially good on TV.
Yep.
I think those two things go a long way to explaining his lead in the national polls. But again, I would look, what happens in Iowa, what happens in New Hampshire, why are the races closer there? I think that people are looking at it more seriously. They're paying more attention to where they stand on the issues, their credibility. But I will say, where Cruz and Trump are on the issues, if you look at the polls, clearly that's where the Republican base is, which is quite different from the people in this town.
Very interesting. But in our 2 minutes, I've got to talk about Hillary Clinton. When you look at Bernie Sanders, here's Sanders in the Bloomberg Des Moines Register poll. Sanders is at 40, she's at 42%, Hillary Clinton. That is within the margin of error. He's closing in on her, if not surpassing her, in a few of these polls. What happens in this race, particularly with the 1,340 instances of transferring classified data via an unsecured server? The FBI is investigating. They're going to enlarge that probe. How does that affect this race?
I think the email scandal and the resurrection of President Clinton's scandals in the White House, those are clearly hurting Hillary Clinton. But it's amazing for Sanders to be strong in Iowa. Again, those first 2 states, the momentum really matter. He's stronger than New Hampshire. This is a guy from Vermont. If he wins Iowa, again, on the Democratic side, totally changes the race.
Really?
Completely.
You think Hillary starts to sink?
I don't see how, if Bernie Sanders wins Iowa, he doesn't win New Hampshire, and Hillary Clinton will have lost the first 2 races. It is crucial for Hillary Clinton to win the Iowa caucuses.
Very interesting. This is an amazing political season. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No, it's extraordinary.
Yeah,
It truly is.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Terry Jeffrey, we
Raymond,
will check
thank you very
back in
much.
with you and watch all the theatrics as it unveils itself.